So let's talk quickly two drugs, especially dolutegravir lamivudine. Maybe Paul.
Yeah, I mean, the data...
Should we use it?
I think the data are very promising, especially from the Gemini studies. We anticipated there might be some extra resistance from the ACDG pilot study, single-arm study, but so far, at least the 48-week data, there weren't no resistance, and it was as good as dolutegravir plus TDF FTC. Very encouraging. And we are going to see a large study of switching patients who are stably suppressed from TAF regimens and comparing continuing TAF regimens versus dolutegravir lamivudine. So there definitely are some attractive aspects of it. One in particular is pharmacoeconomic. Lamivudine has been available since '95. It's been generic a long time. We totally know its safety track record. Yep. And our modeling studies suggest that this is really the most cost-effective way to treat people, especially if we can switch stably suppressed patients to dolutegravir lamivudine. It's not a good drug for that immediate start, that immediate regimen. I think we don't know about its resistance barrier. Transmitted 184V does happen, although it's not that common. I would not be choosing it for that particular approach. I will say one other group for whom I'm still not totally comfortable using TAF in are people with really moderate to severe renal disease. Mm-hmm. And these typically are older patients, right. Older patients who've maybe been on tenofovir for years and years, and it's DF formulation, right. And their creatinine clearance is 30 or so, and you want to save those last nephrons. Mm-hmm. Why not switch them to dolutegravir lamivudine, right, or even dolutegravir emtricitabine if you're concerned about using lamivudine with impaired renal function. So those are two settings where I feel very comfortable using it.
Or dolutegravir plus rilpivirine.
Yeah.
So maybe you could mention that, Ian.
It works.
Sure. So there are two studies called the SWORD studies, and really Paul introduced the concept of switching antiretroviral therapy, and I'll just start by saying this is the most common decision that I'm making in my practice today. We have people who are on older regimens associated with high risk for toxicities or complicated regimens. We can simplify therapies. We can maybe eliminate the use of some drugs entirely or the need to take pills multiple times a day. So the SWORD studies looked at people who were on classic 3-drug antiretroviral combinations and compared continuing that regimen to switching to dolutegravir and rilpivirine, which is now available in a single tablet combination pill. And people did just as well, virologic suppression rates of 95% in people who switched versus continue. They couldn't have had any baseline resistance to either of their components, which would be likely not the case in most of the clinical scenarios we're talking about. But who would you use this combination in? Well, it could be somebody with some renal insufficiency. I have people who are on historic regimens, complicated regimens with multiple baseline or multiple nuke-associated mutations. And this has enabled me to simplify regimens considerably. I've had a couple of patients now who have gotten older who now have moved to Medicare. And so they've lost their commercial insurance, and there's that donut hole where you need to pay for medications potentially out of your pocket. Antiretrovirals are expensive, my friends.
Yeah, but so is dolutegravir rilpivirine.
Yes, but it's
not going to be cheap.
It isn't cheaper. But I've had people who are on complicated boosted protease inhibitor regimens with integrase inhibitors. Really 5 individual antiretrovirals who've been able to switch to this and simplify their regimen and cost saving.
Just a couple of caveats to these discussions. One, for the dolutegravir 3TC, it is important to remember, Paul already alluded to the resistance issue, is that everybody enrolled in that study was screened for any resistance. Yeah. And a lot of people screened out of the study because they had any transmitted resistance.
Right, good point.
That they had to be, you have to have their Hep B status at some point soon, because it's only one Hep B drug, and it only enrolled people with viral loads up to 500,000. Yeah. So we're going to have to live with that limitation.
Yeah.
And then the dolutegravir rilpivirine, same thing. It's maintenance therapy for people who
haven't
failed in the past.
And
we're
already doing that's how it was studied. But interestingly, that's not how the package insert.
I saw that.
It's fascinating, right? I agree with Ian in terms of I've used that combination to simplify some pretty complicated regimens of people with NRTI and PI mutations that you really can.
And there's some data from that small experience in Spain in which they did switch people who had highly complicated regimens to dolutegravir rilpivirine, and actually came out pretty well.
Yeah.
So invoking two new classes to which there is not previous resistance,
It makes sense.
Makes sense.
Oh, it makes sense virologically.